Hi everyone, I'm the Director for Common Knowledge Trust, and we house all of the skills of the Birthing Better online birthing classes. These skills were developed in the early 1970s in the United States by hundreds of mothers and fathers, and they continued to develop up until the mid-1980s, and then periodically as we discovered more ways to answer the questions of what if and what can I do about this. So this is the part 5 of a 15-part series. The last part 4, I talked about the early development of birthing better, because in the 1970s there was a huge societal message in the United States that everyone attend the first childbirth preparation classes, which were Lamaze and Bradley. So in the United States, multiple millions of mothers and fathers, because dads were just coming into birth, learned skills. We had no choices back then when I gave birth in 1970. We learned skills, which meant we went into the hospitals under obstetrical care with labor and delivery nurses, and we had assessments, monitoring, and procedures. And those were the evidence-based practice, the standards of care, the guidelines of practice that we accepted. We didn't always like them, but we accepted them as modern women. And we used skills to cope and manage better. Because we always must keep in mind that childbirth is composed of two factors. One is potential risks, issues that can become problems, and women's suffering, which was a total lack of skills. So we can cut down on the suffering by becoming skilled. And because in the United States there was a societal expectation, in other words, we, pregnant women, told each other to take childbirth classes, and those classes were skills-based. So birthing better skills that developed at that time developed for us to cope and manage better and to work together as a mother and a father, because the cesarean rate was 4.5% to save a woman's life. That didn't mean that the women who labored had great births. We could labor for hours or days and days. We could have a good outcome laboring or a poor outcome. And that was the fact that the medical profession didn't have the tools and skills that they have today. So in the 70s, our whole focus in Birthing Better was on better breathing skills, better relaxation skills, better communication skills, and how to work with and around all the assessments and monitoring and procedures. And this period was unique to the United States because at that point, countries were really just dealing with themselves. But by the beginning of the 1980s, the childbirth conversation exploded globally, partly because of the World Health Organization, and partly because communication globally began to get better. We forget that in the 1980s, we were using telephones and, you know, photocopy machines. So the childbirth conversation expanded into in the 1980s, and childbirth began to change. Now, a lot of people say, why, oh, why did the cesarean rate increase from the 4.5%, which would have been pretty normal around the world? Why did it start to increase in the 1980s? And this is where the love affair between modern women consumers and modern medicine is complicated. One of the things, because I'm old enough to know this and you won't remember it, is that in the 70s, there was a cultural revolution. One aspect of the cultural revolution was that we began to wear bikinis. And for those of us who had cesareans, which were classical, we had a scar that ran from our pubic bone to our belly button. And it was ugly, and we didn't want that. And we wanted to be able to wear a bikini and feel proud of our body. We didn't want to feel ugly after birthing our baby. And so the medical profession listened to us, and they devised what's called the bikini cut, or the low-line incision. So you see, our demand as consumers put pressure on the demand of the maternity system to change. The same was true of cesareans. We were knocked out, and so dads weren't permitted at a cesarean. and we demanded change. So the medical profession came up with spinals and now epidurals. Back then, if we had pain relief, we were given medications that were so strong we often didn't remember birth. And we didn't want that. So the medical profession maternity system came up with gentler pain relief. And now we have things like epidurals, which allow you to be awake but not feel anything. So when the natural birth movement has always been really pretty much an anti-medical movement, unless there's a problem, the fact is it was us as consumers that has driven change in the modern medicine, and particularly in the maternity sphere, because women do die, babies do die, but it's not death that's an issue. Women die very infrequently in childbirth. Babies die a bit more frequently, but there are problems that can exist after birth, which are things like pain every time you cough or laugh or run, or pain having sex because your vagina was damaged at birth. So women don't want those things. Women know that having a breech baby is a higher risk, or twins is a higher risk. So how do you deal with those higher risks? Well, modern people want the medical profession to deal with those higher risks. So when we think about the changes from the 70s to the 80s, and as birthing better skills were developing, we had to change with those changes in modern maternity care. And one thing that we talked about in the last part of this, part 4, was that even though we had better skills to cope and manage during labor and during often the intense pain of labor, we still had long first and second stages. And we knew that when we began to have a long birth, a tiring birth, where we felt drained, we felt we couldn't cope anymore, the medical profession didn't want us to suffer. So they were more likely to come in and to do things to intervene. In the 1970s, as I said in part 4, we used the words assessment, monitoring, and procedures. They were different from today. I went in and I was shaved. I was given an enema. I couldn't eat. I couldn't drink. I couldn't get out of bed. I had to lie on my back with feet up in stirrups. We were all given episiotomies. Babies were taken to nurseries. We stayed in hospitals for days because it gave us a rest. So things have changed, and they changed in the United States because birth professionals saw multiple millions of women coming in and being skilled. And when you see skilled women in birth coping better, you relax as a birth professional. Things look better, even when there are issues. But we still had long labors. Nobody could figure out, how do you determine whether a woman has a long or short labor? How do you determine whether a woman has pain she can cope with or not? How do you prevent these things, and can they be prevented? So you have to look at it from 2 points. The medical profession is going to try to prevent those things from using assessments, monitoring, and procedures, which then by the natural birth advocates that arose, the next group that arose in the 70s and the 80s after the first group of the 1950s, the group that arose when I was giving birth were people who were calling all these assessments, monitoring procedures, interventions. And they were implied to be unnecessary and imposed on women. But you have to remember, modern women do not want to go back to the rice paddy to birth. We're modern women. We take Panadol for headaches. We, are very modern. We use medical care for lots and lots of things that if it wasn't available, it wouldn't be available. So we, as just random mothers and fathers who were sometimes having long births, were saying, well, what can we do about it? And that's when we really, really, really deeply understood that we are all one humanity. We had somewhat understood it with the breathing, the language, and the communication skills. In other words, how do you develop skills that work for every birth? Because 100% of pregnant women will give birth. And what we discovered is that each of us is unique. We have our own circumstances, our own beliefs, our own health issues or not health issues. yet we all blink, we all cough, and we can all tighten up our rectum. And this is true for men or women. So that meant we could develop skills for pregnancy and childbirth because we have an exclusive group. 100% of pregnant women will give birth. And so we all blink and cough and can tighten up our rectum. No woman gets pregnant in her brain. She gets pregnant in her belly. No woman breathes through her toe. She breathes in and out her nose or in and out her mouth. And men are the same way. And men experience pain, women experience pain, and so we could develop those early skills. So when we started to look at these long labors and long second stages, it was men who really understood it. It's a container. The woman's body is a container that has a big object inside it. So how do you open up the container? How do you prepare this container to let this object out? And what we realized was in order to prepare the container, we had to be able to create space in it. We had to understand what were the parts that we needed to impact. One is the cervix. Well, how do you impact that? We learned that if we softened inside the soft tissue inside our pelvis, that the cervix has to retract back into that bony structure. So if we have tension, so if you create a little bit of tension in your left and right hip, create a little bit of tension in your sacrum, create a little bit of tension in your pubic bone, that can stop the cervix from dilating. We learned that the baby has to come through a tube. It's our pelvis. We think of the pelvis as one bone, but it's not. It's the hip to the pubic bone. There's a cartilage. Then there's the sacrum and a tailbone. So we could find out the shape of the sacrum. Is it flat or bent or wide or short? We could find out whether our tailbone was long or short. We could create space between with these hips. If we lay down and we put pressure on one hip bone and lift it on the sit bone of that bone, we could create space inside. We could create space between the sit bones. We could create space front to back by mobilizing the sacrum. So men, the fathers who developed birthing better, they were as important to develop these skills as the women were, because they were so technical and mechanical. They could just sort it out. It's a problem. Object, container, make space in the container, object comes through easier. Same way with the birth canal, as Oprah calls it, our vajayjay. We have soft tissue, and most of us don't really know how that soft tissue is inside, but we can prepare that soft tissue. Perineal massage became popular, but that's only the tissue between the vaginal opening and the rectum. That's not enough. If you tense up your rectum now, pull your sit bones together, that's all that tissue in there. And those muscles can be structurally tight. And how do we know that? Because men will say, "You're tight. I like that," right? But this is the baby coming through you. It's not this that's in you. You have to prepare the tissue down there to let this come out. And men got it. They weren't sitting there going, "Oh, yuck," as often we do as women. They were going, "Just let me at it. Teach me how to help my partner prepare her body so that our baby doesn't damage her body. I want to know how." So men, we have over 85% of fathers who will help prepare a woman's vagina 5 minutes a day from 32 weeks onward. And then her vagina will open up to this baby coming through. And she won't need to be cut. She won't have that ring of fire. And she won't delay second stage. So from the late 1970s to the mid-1980s, Birthing Better Skills developed the body skills. What we learned was we knew as little about our birthing body as we did about breathing, communication, and how to use touch effectively. We didn't really pay attention to the fact that the pelvis had 4 bones. We didn't have to pay attention that it had any movement at all. We didn't pay attention at all to the soft tissue of the pelvis, which can impede the movement. we didn't pay attention to the fact, we didn't even think about the fact that we had 4 types of tension. Conscious tension, which means that. Subconscious tension, oh, I lift my shoulder, don't even know I'm doing it. Structural tension, how tight you are in your vagina, or how easily the bones in your pelvis move. Or subconscious tension, we don't even know that we're being tense. Or structural tension, which means that we, have tight muscles in our vagina that we don't know about. So we had to develop all these skills, and then we had to present them to each other so that they made sense. So Nicellete was developing the VBAC project, and we were developing the Birthing Better skills, because with us wearing bikinis, with our demanding that the modern medical profession not cut us from stem to stern, the bikini cut the low-lying incision, which made cesarean safer and easier to do. And because of these long labors that people were having, they knew that beforehand when everybody was laboring. The medical profession didn't want to see us suffer, so we had more cesareans. Now, for a while, we also had forceps delivery, but the natural birth movement and the medical profession knew that forceps could harm babies. Well, why do you need to use forceps? Because you're getting a big object out of a container, and the container has not prepared to open up for that. So this is us. This is consumers. If we don't know that we should prepare our body for birth, if we don't know we should learn skills to cope so we don't suffer, we won't. And sadly, those first Lamaze and Bradley in New Zealand, it was Grantley Dick Reed, and other countries, these 3 obstetricians targeted their skills to low-risk women rather than 100% of pregnant women are going to give birth. So one path got taken, which has led you to where you are now, and the other path that said 100% of pregnant women should learn skills, because 100% of women will give birth, and giving birth is an activity that each woman does with her baby, and she'll do it better when she's skilled, even if those skills were just to cope better and not suffer. But once we started to figure out we could prepare the body for birth and open it up and make it more flexible and mobile, then Birthing Better became a richer set of skills, which means that you don't know that there's an extensive set of skills. You may have heard of hypnobirthing or calm birth or birthing within or Lamaze or Bradley or Janet Balaska's pregnancy yoga. But these are all targeting to low-risk normal births, wanting to not have any interventions. And not only that, but they don't deal with the extent of our body's relationship to our baby, which is this object has to come through a container, and we need to prepare this container for birth. Now, with the Birthing Better skills, because these skills are not linear, we encourage people, this is what we learned, start at around 24 weeks. You know pregnancy is more than halfway through. Your mind is clear. You can take 5 minutes or 15 minutes a day or every few days to begin to create space in your pelvis and learn the skills you'll use. As you start to have Braxton Hicks contractions, practice the breathing, communication, and touch skills so you understand the rhythm of what's happening. The body work skills, if you really can do a hip lift easily, you don't have to keep practicing. You know very well that you got a lot of mobility in your hip. If you have trouble mobilizing the sacrum, do it when you're sitting down. Do it when you're standing up. You don't have to take away from your life. All the skills can be practiced while you're doing other things. And when you get to the courses, we have 5 of them. We have main skills, all of them. Then we broke that up in case you wanted just a short course on the body work or the breathing, language, and touch. And then we have one for VBAC. But when you approach the skill, don't just sit there and go, oh my God, there's so much. Just pick what you want and learn that as a pregnant woman. And as a father, learn what you want as a birth coach. You have equally important roles. So once if the woman says, I don't know if I have a small pelvis, so work with mapping your pelvis. If the father or another person who's going to help you coach says, I want to know how to work with her, then learn the teamwork skills, then teach each other and go through the course as suits you. So I promised that these would not go on for more than 20 minutes. Nicellete work in VBAC is absolutely essential. You must know the facts. You must couple the facts with your choices. Primarily underneath your facts and your choices must be that you are skilled. Because if you do not cope well and you look like you're suffering and you want a VBAC, the medical profession wants to save you and you'll have another cesarean. If you cannot get that baby out of your body in a reasonable amount of time, the medical profession is going to want to save you and you will have another cesarean. So if you want to have a successful VBAC, you need to become skilled and highly skilled and know you're highly skilled and commit to using those skills throughout your baby's birth. Whether you like it or not, it's your baby's birth. Do the activity and get stuck into it. Talk to you later. Remember, this is a YouTube playlist, and you can go through all of these, and there will be 15 parts to it. So talk to you later. Bye-bye.